This painting is by Hassel Smith, who was a pioneer in the abstract expressionist period. In fact, he was a teacher at the California School of Fine Art, taught very famous artists such as Roy DeForest and Wally Hedrick and others. But look at this piece very closely, because this is a period piece, 1952. And they used texture, and this was a very experimental period. Please look around. Excuse me. Hello. Welcome to Natsoulas Novoloso Gallery. In the next hour, we're going to be presenting a video about the King Ubu Gallery. The King Ubu Gallery was one of the first cooperative spaces that started in 1952. This was indeed a gallery for many artists. There were painters, poets, sculptors, and musicians, filmmakers. They all got together and started one of the first vanguard galleries on the West Coast. We have really documented this through interviews, exclusive interviews with great artists such as Roy DeForest, Elmer Bischoff, and Seymour Locks. I'm John Natsoulas, the co-owner of the Natsoulas Novoloso Gallery, so let's get started. Elmer Bischoff, one of the pioneers of the abstract expressionist movement and the figurative movement later on in the 60s, is very well represented in this video. We have a great transition piece called the singing lesson. The figures are slightly abstracted, and they're going into being completely a realistic painting. In fact, later on in the 50s, you will also see this painting shortly. You'll see the late afternoon. Elmer Bischoff said, "I describe the transition between the abstract and figurative period as the end of a love affair. The passion is the work, and the work is the passion." So were you influenced then by the museums that were showing these people? I mean, like
well, in magazines and whenever a show would come around.
Like that late afternoon piece that was in the show, everybody was trying to figure out who influenced this piece. Was it Gauguin?
Lautrec?
Yeah.
Was it because there was a show? Who knows? I mean, we don't remember that, but you did go to the museums and look.
Oh, there was a tremendous amount of that. We borrowed from one another, and we borrowed from all of these people. We did feel that we were doing a special own thing.
Yeah. Well, you were.
Yes, we were.
You were.
Yeah, there was a difference to it, and we were very conscious of that, and we would have resented any suggestion that this is all just pale reflections of what was going on.
Right. Well, I mean, there is a
going on in the East. But along with, I mentioned the kind of spirit that was generated by these students. I think that was a pretty important thing. But then McKeague had the genius. This was sort of, the Times handed these students to you. There are plenty of GI people in all the schools. But the thing that wasn't handed was McKeague. He was a very special person, and he had a tremendous vision about what the school
So he had
should be.
an energy that
And he brought together then a faculty, which was, the only thing I can think of is the early days of the Bauhaus, where they were just sort of keyed up and they were spiriting one another.
You were all
There was
young,
a lot of
too.
competition.
Yeah.
And then this was, you mentioned the togetherness and people working hand in hand and so forth, but there was a lot of competition.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody was trying to show everybody else just how a painting should be painted.
I think that had its aftermath also.
And it's what?
Aftermath.
Yeah.
Because, there's pictures of Diebenkorn in people's like Hassel and Diebenkorn studio and Hassel, Diebenkorn and Hassel studio, or are you all working together in rooms, and there's these pictures, and we get this idea, oh, they were all working together, we don't know.
There's a tremendous amount of individual ambition.
Uh-huh.
God.
But there was a lot
Tremendous
more
ambition.
communication.
I mean, do you remember a time when you were in Hassel's studio and there was 6 or 7 artists in there with you? I mean,
No, I never experienced
or
that.
at the school?
Well, David Park had a studio in a little tiny space, fraction of what I have here. It was upstairs in one of the classrooms. It was a kind of tiny mezzanine.
Mhm.
You walked up these stairs, and it wasn't too well lit. And David and Diebenkorn
Where
and I
was
used to
this?
go. It was up in Dora Boswell's, above Dora Boswell's little studio. We used to go up there and sit and work, but just the 3 of us.
Mhm.
It wasn't a big mass mob scene.
Okay.
7 people piling in.
Okay.
And then we would visit one another's studios periodically on a regular basis, and we would discuss and exchange ideas and criticize one another's work. That's something that has never gone on at the university. I don't think it
Right.
goes on very much.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
sort of.
So,
So it wasn't, we were very close friends, and it wasn't necessarily that we would have that much intimate communication with other artists. But on the other hand, here was this, in general in the school, there was a lot of socializing. A lot more than I've ever experienced before or since. There was a lot more
Big
camaraderie
parties.
and big
Sounds like
parties,
a great
and McKeague encouraged this.
oh, good.
Yeah, that's true. All the big parties were at the school, and he played the trumpet and the jazz band.
And that again was like the early Bauhaus.
Pardon?
Yeah.
And that again was
That
like
was
the
it.
early Bauhaus.
So, nobody really influenced you per se at that period, or did you see somebody you were working with at the time? I mean, you didn't do collaborative work. You weren't really influenced by a particular artist.
Yes.
Well, you'd pick up things. I mean, it would strike you, and you'd be adapting these things to your own purposes. There's a tremendous amount of that. And in many ways, I think that it was, for me, a second schooling,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe more
Yeah.
crucial than my formal training at the university
Mm-hmm.
years earlier.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people I run into, keep asking me this question, how come there is this change? And so I want to ask you this question. How did the abstract expressionism come to be an inadequate or incomplete vehicle of expressionism, causing you, Park, and others to move toward the figure again?
Mhm.
That's something that came up to me through this last month of
You
being
mean
around this
people
world.
are asking you?
Yeah, how did it happen? Wow, look at this. Look at Adelie's piece. Look at Sonia's piece. Look at Lily's. Look at the singing lesson. It was abstracted.
Yeah. Well, I can only answer that for myself. I wouldn't want to try to answer
For the whole period.
to describe
Yeah.
This happened as a movement. I wouldn't want
Okay.
people would have to speak.
Yeah. Huh.
To speak. It happened. One thing that it did have in common with the school that we've been talking about is it happened at the end of the period of McKeague's period.
Aha.
Curiously. And what relation, as Adelie says, it's mysterious, what relation it had to this termination of a especially vital period at the school where we were all teaching. I'm speaking of Diebenkorn and Park and myself at least, is something I can't explain. But for me, it was any dramatic change, and there have been other dramatic changes. I've switched from figurative painting in '74 back to non-figurative, and that's a very dramatic change too. All of these changes were very internal. They arise out of internal needs that I have as an artist. They arise out of the life in the studio, in other words, essentially. And then they pick up whatever they need to open up possibilities. For example, I was very impressed with the fine figurative work that David Park had started a short while earlier. And when I had began to generate a sort of dissatisfaction or feel a dissatisfaction with what was happening in my work non-figuratively, naturally I'd be susceptible to this if I was impressed by it. Here it was right at hand, and here's a good friend doing this sort of thing. So naturally I'm going to then absorb some of that. Now, what got Diebenkorn to make the change, I don't know. He may have another picture entirely. Why Park did this in the first place is still another picture, you see.
Did they talk about it?
Well, they would say, yeah, David Park would say things that were mostly very romantic things. He wanted to, I don't know, he felt that there was a kind of arrogance that had arisen in the non-objective work. He wanted something more humble, more down to earth, more everyday, more accessible, and more warm, had more warmth of feeling. And ultimately, maybe something, you could understand it very well, something that he could get more emotionally involved in. You can cool off on things. You can keep doing them. But then that's a mistake. You have to find something that you're going to have some intensity and feeling about. And especially, I think, all of this growing out of our experience at the school where all the work was accompanied by, all the work we admired was accompanied by tremendous, yes, tremendous involvement, personal involvement, intellectually and emotionally, passion, as Adelie says. Yeah, I think there's some people who paint representationally that could never make the switch because they could never invest themselves.
Sure, sure.
You might say, well, it's because they're too caught up with subject matter. That could be one possible answer. On another hand, they might say, well, this woman that I'm married to is good for life.
Yeah.
For me, I don't have to make this change.
Right. I can understand that.
Because both is possible.
I've seen that so many times.
Both are possible.
Harry Jacobus, the founder of the King Ubu Gallery, started working with Jess and poet Robert Duncan in forming the King Ubu Gallery. Jacobus, an amazing organizer, put together the lighting, put together the stage, put together everything. He facilitated the whole structure of the King Ubu Gallery. Jacobus's paintings were extremely abstract with large drips. He did large murals with Jess. In fact, Jacobus's ability to organize and put together a lot of the productions at the King Ubu enabled it to be one of the most successful galleries, if not the most successful, on the West Coast. You and Jess Collins and Robert Duncan were sitting around the early 50s thinking about painting and poetry, and somehow you came up with the idea of opening a gallery. How did that all start?
Well, mainly because there was very few places where one could show in the city at that time. And the few galleries that were there were very conservative and dull as far as we were concerned. And we wanted a place that would be fairly casual and this friend of mine who was doing little theater stuff came up into the space down on Fillmore Street. It was cheap, $50 a month. And I thought, well, I'd go in there and whitewash the walls and whatever. And there was lighting equipment. We had stage lights and things like that, which I put up in the rafters. And we just decided to do it and did it. But at that time, we only wanted to do it for 1 year because we knew that none of us were gallery people. We wanted to do the work more than anything else. But we wanted to start something, sort of test out the community. We didn't actually say that, but looking back on it, that's probably what we were doing, to see how the things what would happen. And it was a big success as far as the few people who did come there. But it didn't make a big impact on the community at all, and particularly the art community. But that was fun, doing it. And
You had gotten involved with it, and the name and everything is kind of a anti-establishment, going against the grain type thing.
We wanted an irreverent atmosphere rather than Clifford Still always talked about the gas oven galleries of New York, in particular, and we still have them, but that cold atmosphere of and we didn't want anything ostentatious. We wanted it clean, and white walls and things like that. We also wanted poetry readings. We wanted everything else mixed into it. We wanted music and things like that. And more like a club, an art club.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the murals you did in there that Jess did, you all got together and did some.
Yeah, we wanted the place also to be decorated. In a sense, we wanted the paintings to work off of things other than just plain white walls and whatever. We wanted more activity, more of interplay of elements, which offended quite a few people.
Because it didn't fit with the norm, the way it was supposed to be. You've done a lot of several murals with Jess before, in like Berkeley or.
We collaborated, but not at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, the kind of thing. And Pauline Kael had walls that we painted in her place. But back to the gallery, that was preceded that by a few years.
They were kind of abstract murals that you were doing in the gallery?
Yes. Mostly there was one wall that just did. And then the floor was completely done as a mural. It was 5 different people worked on it at the same time. And it was kind of a spontaneous thing.
Who were they?
Jess, myself, Robert Duncan, and a man named Fred Snowden that worked for the Oakland Museum.
Right.
And another man, I don't remember his name.
And when did you do this mural on the floor?
Just about the night or two before it opened.
So I heard something about you.
It never dried.
So you whitewashed it?
It never dried, so I had a powdery whitewash left over from the walls, and at the last minute I threw that down on the floor and swept it. And it gave it a kind of a fresco look.
Effect,
an old fresco look. It was absolutely marvelous looking. In fact, I don't think we ever had 8 paintings in there up to the mural.
Wow. And the entryway as you walked in was.
That was Jess's thing.
Yeah.
It was a very freely drawn motif of eyes, I believe.
And what was it? Was there bright colors as you walked in?
It was. He had a gold paint, an orange, red, black. It was quite bright. Yeah, it was very Matisse, Picasso-ish kind of thing.
It was a very kind of narrow building.
Yeah, it was. I think 8 feet wide. At the entrance for a long ways, because it was a garage, and then it opened up into a bigger area, and then there was a little stage.
And the first night was a group show, right?
Yeah, the opening night was a large-scale drawing show,
right,
which we had at Bischoff and Park.
I remember that in the catalog.
Smith, yeah.
And you were all friends at the time, or you all knew them, or how did
we were not particularly friends. We knew each other from the school, but mostly we knew of each other by the work. We liked each other's liked the work.
So, like I approach, people for shows. Did you go and approach your professors, Bischoff and Park and Smith for?
Yeah.
You just said,
We're having a show.
We're having a show, and we want
we'd
to
like
put
to
you.
submit something.
And
we're surprised that they.
And you were, you were all in your 20s at that time, and
Yes.
and you just went and asked them, and they were only like 5 or 6, 7 years senior. to
Yeah,
you.
it's hard to believe that they were only a few years older.
Yeah,
at
they were
that
only-
time, I thought they were monumental, older type people.
Right. Well, I mean, Bischoff was 10 years older, but
Yeah.
the rest of them were fairly the same. And so you went and you asked the artist for the pieces, and you had the show, and it was the large scale drawing show was pretty successful.
It was successful by the way it looked.
By the
As
way it
far as
looked, yeah.
selling, I don't think we sold it.
Yeah, I don't think money was apparent. at
No,
the time.
that was never.
I mean, the interview, after talking to Roy DeForest, he was mentioning that he never thought that he was ever going to go anywhere with art, but he kept doing it, and that he never thought anybody would become famous. He thought maybe there was an outside chance that one of his friends might get a teaching job, but that was it.
Yeah, well, the atmosphere of the school, that was the whole point. There wasn't any careerism at that time. The only
Uh-huh.
thing you could possibly do was maybe get a job teaching
Yeah.
or do sign painting like James Weeks did. But
Mhm.
the philosophy of the school was that doing art was more like a search for truth kind of thing. It wasn't connected with making money.
Right.
But I think that's probably that was a carryover from Still. Still had that kind of mystical approach to painting.
Your work was real abstract at the time.
Yeah, very abstract,
Yeah.
very ugly, very.
Yeah. I mean, that one piece that I saw in the photo was
Yeah.
actually kind of nice. Real
Well,
lot
I'm
of
embarrassed by it now, but.
We haven't seen it.
Huh?
We haven't seen it. It was just in the photo, that one
That's
piece.
right. It's gone. Yeah. It was
Yeah, I don't
just-
know where it
It's
is.
just done on wallpaper or something.
Yeah.
Everybody was working on very impermanent material.
And that was because,
Well, there was no. I mean, it wasn't supposed to last forever. It was just.
oh, I see. It was just to do, just to be
do.
creative.
No, I mean, this is you're in a completely different
I
atmosphere
know.
now.
Well, obviously.
Where everything is made for a market, which actually makes more sense
Uh-huh.
when you get right down to it.
Right.
What's the point of doing something
Yeah.
unless you can make a living out of it?
Roy DeForest was a student at the California School of Fine Art of one of the very first assemblage artists, Hassel Smith. Hassel and his class had a show at the King Ubu Gallery in 1952. Roy DeForest was one of the first instrumental assemblage artists. He showed, in fact, some of the very first assemblage artists on the West Coast at the King Ubu. He had a neat way of taking found objects and adding them to paintings in a sculptural type form, beads and strings coming off these paintings. In fact, Roy DeForest was one of the first experimenters. Basically, you were doing abstract work?
Um,
Because actually we don't have, I
Yeah.
haven't seen anything from that
yeah, it
period.
was all abstract painting. I did some, most radical thing I did was, I had some collages that were kind of like Rauschenberg did later, but I think they're maybe wilder even. I did a series of those. That was probably the most radical thing.
What was the
Soup
collage
cans.
made out of? What?
Old wood, little wood panels, and they had soup can wrappers and black enamel. And, I did a series of those. That was probably the most radical thing. And I've been sort of abstract expressionist painting. I'm a big Elmer Bischoff painting. And then I got into, a little later, some kind of abstract painting that actually led to what I'm doing now in the sense that it's kind of map-like.
But
And,
then, did you go on to do figurative work later, or?
I did a little bit at that time. Maybe it's in response to David Park's class, which I didn't take. I did a little bit of figurative painting, in that style, and some kind of things inspired by Still and Rothko. But then I got into these collages, and I got into some kind of abstract painting that looked like looking down from an airplane, topographic stuff with little dots. And that might have actually, the person I knew best and still know as a teacher was Hassel Smith.
Right.
Maybe influenced more by. And he
Why were you influenced by Hassel?
Well, Hassel was kind of flamboyant. He's a very bright guy. He's in the context of all those people, he was more overtly kind of intellectual. He had a lot of ideas, and I talked a lot about other things than just painting, just about science and so forth. And, interesting, crazy guy, real kind of bohemian in many ways, but he'd been a university education and was interested, talk about things other than just straight art or how you move the color.
I see.
And he also did he had done some figurative painting that was inspired by Cézanne. It was marvelous stuff, very, very funny. Very
Saucy.
witty. Yeah, some of those early things are witty. And there was Pascal. And I think I started these landscape paintings, I don't know how it generated out of talking to Hassel. And the other work that, now ultimately comes out of that, I kind of tipped up the landscape and added figuration to it. And after my experience with the King Ubu and all that finished up fairly fast because I was in the Army. I think.
How long were you there?
I was there, I think, about 2 years because I actually graduated from the place, and I was pretty broke all the time.
Did Roy de Forest become one of the best sculptural painters? Well, in fact, he became such a great assemblage artist and a very good sculptor through the tutorage of Seymour Locks. Seymour Locks, where Roy DeForest got his MFA, along with many other artists at San Francisco State, was a professor for 45 years. Seymour had the ability to take old pieces of driftwood and turn them into beautiful pieces of art. He, in the 40s, understood what jewelry and nails could make a piece of wood look like a piece of art. How did he do it? Well, he initiated much of the avant-garde, vanguard of the Bay Area in the 40s and 50s. In fact, he was one of the great organizers. He's put together shows at the Museum of Modern Art. But in fact, he put together one of the best shows at the King Ubu Gallery. This man was solely responsible for much of the sculpture in the Bay Area. How did Seymour Locks get involved with the King Ubu Gallery? Do you remember that?
Well, Roy and, well, it was really Hassel who was the so-called mentor. We met at his house for, I don't know, many, many months, every Thursday night or whatever, and he would come on with an idea, and then we'd all participate. So we had a kind of a little...
But a collaborative?
Yeah.
He'd have an idea and then you work a collaborative together?
Yeah, he would give a little lecture about, you know, Hassel had been an art historian at Northwestern. And so he would start the meeting with a little talk about maybe Dionysus and Apollonian points of view. You know, he'd dig something out from the past and the attitudes. We're talking about attitudes and meanings in art. We didn't really spend time too much saying what was good.
The three of you?
Well, no. There was others too.
Jim Kelly was there?
I think Jim and Sonia.
I just saw Sonia.
And Julius. I'm not sure exactly, but Ralph Case, and there were some other people, and I can't really remember who came every week and all of that.
So they were kind of like these
Anyway,
meetings.
this kind of a clique or clan of non-objective and Dada and assemblage, you know, whatever. We were really neo-Dada. We reflected a lot of the abstract expressionist ideas, principally under the influence of Clifford Still. But anyway, we somehow were a group. We were invited to show at the Jewish Center in the East, New York, I guess it was. I don't know why Chicago, but I think it was in New York.
The Jewish Museum?
Yeah. And so we sent our paintings. I was a painting person as well. So anyway, that group really hung together for quite a while.
Do you remember the interior of the gallery?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It had this long hallway, or whatever, entranceway. And then you came into a kind of a squarish room. On that, looking straight ahead was a stage kind of situation. And then it kind of went back. So you would see it as a big L shape. We exhibited in the hallway, too. But mostly and our shows, I thought, were very striking. And one of the things that I think distinguished our group in a way was that we were interested in teaching too. And that yet has to be documented, I think, because we had a big influence, I think, on methods of teaching that were different too. Even Elmer I got students of his who came over from the Art Institute, and I got lots of good feedback about the way he dealt. Not everybody liked Elmer, but he was apparently, you know, doing his job.
Yeah.
And that, you know, is rare in the art field, that people really pay attention to the teaching end of it.
Right, because they'd like to be working.
So I think a retrospective sometime, or some kind of thing about
Artists and teachers.
is,
Artists
to me
last.
at least, That's been my life,
Uh-huh.
so naturally.
Yeah.
And I have evidence to show, and so does Hassel, and so does Bischoff, and David,
So
and
does
all these
DeForest,
people.
yeah.
They have evidence that it means
Sure.
something for the whole art program in California.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other places.
You know what? When you went to those openings, was there some kind of a, I mean, it was like a party, or what was it like? And I wasn't there, so I'd really like to know.
Well, our shows, of course, the one I think of Hassel, of course, is of the leader of the group. He was a little older, and he was more mature in many ways. But he held that group together somehow, and
Kind of a charisma?
yeah, I think so, because of course Hassel is a bombastic personality.
Yeah, he is.
And we did a lot of dancing. There was a lot of partying. I didn't go to all of them, but being a jazz enthusiast, he had all the early Dixieland and New Orleans music, and I had a good collection too. So we did have wonderful dancing parties. In the 50s, there seemed to be a real kind of camaraderie among the artists. We communicated with each other. And so we carried over our Thursday night things into, like, they were musicians too. Bischoff was a musician, and Wally Hedrick with his
banjo. Yeah.
And I didn't go to all of them. I wasn't, interested in partying that much. But yeah, we knew each other a lot.
Yeah.
And we were close to each other. And we passed our students back and forth, so there was a kind of, like Wally came over, they didn't have...
Not so long ago, there was a great movement, the abstract expressionist movement. My question is why? Why would an established painter like Elmer Bischoff or Hassel Smith, David Park, Edward Corbett, who were in fact salaried employees, teachers, why would they take house paint, old canvases, old junk, and put together art? Why did they do that? In fact, Edward Corbett, he abandoned his Mondrian-esque geometric paintings for abstract expressionism. I just can't understand it at all. It doesn't make any sense. I ask you, why? Why this big change? Well, nobody really knows. A lot of people say, well, the GI Bill did it. Everybody said it wasn't because we had money. Well, let me kind of set the stage. After the war, people were going to school. And these artists, they weren't young. They were older. They were 5 or 6, 7 years past the time they were supposed to be in college, late 20s, early 30s. And you know what they were doing? They were trying to catch up. And thank God for the GI Bill. As Elmer Bischoff said,